Hello and welcome to another episode of the Self-Made Podcast. On this episode, I get Pat Davidson on the show and literally just wow. This is one of the most blown away I have been by a podcast recording, and to the point where the title changed multiple times during the show as more and more interesting points come up. This is not where I expected this conversation to go, but I'm so glad it went there. In this episode, we talk nutrition approaches. What is the right approach for you to get in shape? The same with training. What are the approaches that work well? What are the approaches that don't? And what does Pat want to see go away in the industry? But where this episode gets really interesting is where we delve into Pat's backstory. We talk confidence. He is a man who is no bullshit and he has tons of self-confidence in the industry. And we talk about where that came from. Is it something that came from his family? Is it something that has helped him or hindered him as he's moved into a coaching relationship? We go from there to talk about key coaching skills. How has he, a man who struggled with human interaction, learned to be such a high quality and effective coach? We go through his roots of struggling with addiction in regards to alcohol and what advice he would give to anyone who is in a bit of a hole themselves to get out. There was an analogy at the end of this episode about mountains that will really, for me, I thought was really powerful and really transformed the way I think about mental health. So stay tuned for that. If you enjoy the episode, as always, please give it a share, tagging me, tagging Pat Davidson. Let me know. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. And if you could leave us a 5-star review, that would be even better. And I'm going to leave you myself and Pat Davidson. So Pat, I've been very excited to actually get a chance to chat to you, get you on, because if there's one thing that I tend to like in these interviews is I'm surprised I've not got myself cancelled by having a completely unfiltered voice box. And one of the things I admire about you in the industry is that you're absolutely no bullshit. There's a level of confidence in your convictions and in your actions I'd love to delve into. But for people who might not know who Pat Davidson is, tell us a little bit about who Pat is and what are you known for?
Sure. And thank you for having me on this morning. And anytime I hear that it's going to be no filtered, no bullshit, I'm excited about that. So, my background is that I have a PhD in exercise physiology. I worked as a professor at 2 different universities for 5 years. And following that, I got into the private sector in New York City in the fitness world. And I've been here for the last 7 years, and my career has gone in various directions during that time. There's been a personal training part of things. There's been my own kind of like education business side of things. In terms of writing books and putting together seminars and teaching on various levels. So that's kind of like career-wise, the basics of it. And then the other thing I'm probably known for is that I've been a competitive athlete, at various points in times. So I have lived it from the perspective of like really training this stuff. And, at least in terms of sports that have been in the fitness world, I competed in strongman, and I competed for 2 different world championships at the 175-pound weight class in that sport. So, I finished my PhD in 2009. So it's been a while now since I've had that. It's, you do the math on these things. It's been almost 13 years. And boy, it's kind of crazy to think that it's been that long now, but I've been in some way, shape, or form involved with training myself or training other people, for quite a while, since the 1990s. And that's a significant, expansive time to go through. And I think that I'm still extremely motivated to train very, very hard, to continue to consume information that's like going to be really applicable and helpful from the perspective of making my training and the other people that I work with, their training optimal. And I really do love the overall industry and the overall concept of everything involved with physical development of humans.
Yeah, so there's so much to unpack into that, and I think we'll go into a number of areas. But you mentioned very much at the start, you always get very excited when it's a no BS filter, and I think that's a good thing to delve into first. Is that the initial working title I had for this podcast was the no BS defender of the fitness industry, and what do you think it is that's given you this confidence in yourself, your products, your convictions? Is that something you feel like you've always had, or you've developed this self-confidence through your education, through other things that you've done? Like, how would you say you've got to where you are in terms of being able to shop through information, be confident, and have conviction in your words?
Well, I think that anytime there's always a genetic component to anything, and then there's early environment, later environment, sorts of trajectories. And I know, like, from just a family perspective, like, people in my family are very smart, and that does, I think, carry a significant weight with any kind of discussion like that. Most people in my family are pretty crazy too, but they're very intelligent and, just in different areas. Like, I'm the only, I was really the only male in my family. Like, my grandparents on my mother's side raised me, but they had 5 daughters, and then those daughters had all girls. So I was like the first male in a lot of offspring, and anyways, like, I'm very different than the women of the family, like, so their interests maybe were in, like, antiques and other, like just random things that I have absolutely no interest in, but really a lot of brilliant people. And, I was raised by my grandparents, and they were extremely pushy towards me being, like, very, like, if you were uneducated to them, like, they would just disown you. You were just, like, not worth existing on this planet, basically. And their, constant reminders about the importance of reading in particular, I think that rubs off on you. And, to me, it's like, if I'm not reading something all the time, I feel like very much like a waste of carbon on this planet. Like, I'm just, like, being a complete lackluster human being. So the behavioral component definitely was driven into me at a young age in terms of that stuff. And also, like, my grandparents, they were born in 1914 and 1915 respectively, and they grew up during the Great Depression, and those were their formative times. So the voices that were put into my head at a young age were from, like, second generation Irish people living in Massachusetts, and individuals that grew up during the Great Depression, a very difficult time in the world. And so it was tremendous work ethic kind of talk, and just a different cultural voice, I think, than what a lot of people received. Like, these were tough people. They were hard, like, there was not a lot of soft love from that perspective. A lot, the advice of my grandfather was always good. He would always say things like, don't be a goddamn fool. Don't always listen to other people. A lot of people are idiots, like, just because a bunch of other people are doing something this way doesn't mean you should do that. Think for yourself. Like, why don't you just keep your eyes open and see what's going on in front of you? And, I think that, again, that's something that is, like, I am a parent now, and I hear the way people talk to their kids, and I hear my own inner monologue, and my inner monologue of what I should say to my son is kind of what was handed to me by people that were born in the early 19s, 1910s, basically. So I do recognize that I think that I have a little bit of a different inner monologue as a result of the early voices that were given to me. And those inner voices were, my grandfather he was the oldest in his family, and his father was crippled by polio, and he had to ultimately start working and supporting the family when he was like 12 years old. And, went on to work his ass off the rest of his life. And he grew up, in like kind of having to be a longshoreman on the docks in Boston as a kid, working with grown men in a time that was very competitive to get any kind of money. And he ultimately worked his way through the Boston Postal Service and like really had to be a very self-made person. And when I look even at the generation up from me, some of my aunts were very self-made people, and that, so the ideas about education and reading and work ethic, and also just like, not a lot of trust. Like Irish people don't trust anybody, and particularly government or people in authority positions. So a lot of that was kind of handed down to me. And it was like, you have to make things on your own, and so it's interesting. I wouldn't say, I think I give off a different perspective than necessarily what goes on inside of me. People are always like, oh, you're so calm or something. And like, you seem very confident. Like you and it's like, I would disagree with that. I think that I struggle a lot in terms of like internal feelings of self-worth and self-esteem. I think that I actually have fairly low levels in those areas, and that I'm talented in some areas, and that I've probably overly relied on talent in some areas to push my life forward to be able to at least be successful. From the standpoint of being able to do public speaking, for instance, like I am much more comfortable from a public speaking standpoint than I am with interpersonal communication, and being able to develop like, rich, real relationships on a person-to-person basis. It's something that I've really had to work on very hard as an adult in my 40s, but something that really was very much missing from me. And again, it's almost like sometimes when I see people that are very successful in certain areas, but really struggle in other parts of their life, it's like there's oftentimes very much like an overcompensation or a narrowing of focus and attention towards the one or two things that consistently provide reward. And I think that is the case with me in a lot of ways, where it's like education-based things and being able to portray intelligence and information in a delivery manner is something that I've always been pretty good at for whatever reason. And I've just simply driven that forward as a result of being rewarded for being good there and getting positive feedback from other people, and also financial feedback in the process.
Do you think that's the two sides of the coin of growing up in a very hardworking, in a way, sort of like demanding, honest family, that it gives you that work ethic, but at the same time, you help me. Is that the reason why you think you have that insecurity, because you've always been pushed to be more, do more, work harder?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I wouldn't say that it was honest. You know what I mean? Yeah. It was. There's a big difference between like kind of scrapping and fighting and clawing for anything you can get, and honesty. Like I think my grandparents were pretty honest and straightforward individuals, but a number of other people in the other generations, like I don't think I was raised in a way that really rewarded honesty. I think it was much more of an environment of presenting with a public face that's good. And if you've done anything bad, hide that as much as you possibly can. And that's difficult. Like there were a lot of, I would say, like strategies or things like that from an early childhood experience that lead to kind of like formation of a double life or like presenting in one way, but under the surface having a lot of like really red flags and problematic areas, because there was no room for reality in total. It's almost like, lie, manipulate, and massage the truth to get the outcomes that you believe are best case scenario. And that is perfectly fine. You know what I mean? Sometimes like the analogy or the comparison I give is in Sparta, the males and females lived in separate barracks, and you were not allowed to leave your barracks, but they continued to populate their Sparta. So somehow, some way, men and women were able to get together and procreate. And really the thing that the Spartans frowned down upon was getting caught. If you were dumb enough to get caught, then you were an idiot and you were a problem. And I feel like it's the same sort of a thing where it's like, there would be reward for me growing up. If you can get away with something, it's almost like good for you. If you get caught for something, like, are you kidding me? Like this, like, man, you're not even worth, you're not worth being here. So it is interesting. And I don't know how many other family dynamics create a similar thing, but in terms of, for me, and I do think it's important because I have been a workaholic, and I have definitely overly relied on work success for a personal identity, and I think that in part that's because the other parts were lacking.
Yeah.
And those other parts are I think a lot of those things are built on the idea of you as you, the complete and total reality of you with all of your flaws and all of your mistakes, you're still good enough and you're loved. Mm-hmm. And I think that in a lot of ways, I never felt comfortable actually like bringing up any problems or downsides or anything like that. And as a result of that, it's almost like just overcompensate for those things with productivity, success, and achievement.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally empathize and relate to that. I ran education for a global personal training company for a number of years, and it became almost part of my identity. Where even though when I left, I was still going into almost the same realm. It's very strange that my identity was so wrapped up in this who I was, what I did, that when I all of a sudden came out of that bubble, it was like, well, what do I do now? And like, how did you navigate this in the early parts of your career before? You may have gained notoriety, authority, and real confidence in your words. How did you navigate this thing where, like, you're so focused on this that I'm sure at times there would have been setbacks, there would have been roadblocks along the way. How did you navigate that in terms of how it didn't knock your confidence, knock your identity, and keep pushing forward?
Well, I look back at my own timeline, and I started the process of going to graduate school when I was just turning 24. And, the interesting thing is a year prior to that, like I was in about as low a place as I could possibly be in terms of substance abuse. And just really like, I managed to get through undergraduate school. It took me a couple of turns and a couple of tries. Because I really had major problems with alcohol and drugs. And eventually I kind of got into enough of a groove to be able to study and get through undergraduate. And then once I finished that, I went into like the postgraduate time, and I just spun so out of control on such a bad like drug binge that extended for a number of months. And really brought me to a place of like being suicidal. And it was a really bad time in my life. And at that point in time, I'm very grateful for how low and how bad it got, because I was able to finally, go into recovery for it and get completely sober and stop with all forms of substance use. And when I did that, I got into 12-step recovery work, and it really gave me a kind of a roadmap on how to live, And I felt really good because I was still only 23, 24 years old. My physiology snapped back really fast. At the time, I was competing in mixed martial arts at that point in my life. And, at the worst of things, even that had fallen off and I wasn't training or doing anything. It was really just like a really bad thing. But once I got sober, I got back into it. And, I had a lot of really good pieces surrounding me. And it was a very simple time for me in my life. I was able to, live kind of on my own. I was able to train mixed martial arts. I was able to go to school, starting graduate school, and I was able to, work 12-step recovery stuff. So it really was like a very nice environment to be in that supported success and good behaviors. And that was, the early 20s is a great time in life to be single-minded and focused. And I was incredibly single-minded and focused at that point in time. I had a very, very narrow bandwidth from a routine standpoint. There wasn't a lot of social activity for me. It was kind of like, work, school, train, 12-step meetings, wash, rinse, and repeat. And I studied my ass off and I trained really hard. And, it just began the process. And, within 5 years, I had finished a master's degree and a PhD. And, it was just literally kind of like being highly, highly focused and locking in. And there weren't too many roadblocks or distractions at that point in time. I didn't have a rich network socially. I didn't have a lot of things, if anything, like as an adult after that, with gaining things and, like the personal, like the social experience expanding, that's more difficult to navigate. I've had to deal with issues and distractions and things in my late 30s and 40s that have been much more challenging than the process of in my 20s getting squared away and being on a really narrow trajectory towards being very successful.
Do you think that's because, do you think that's either because of being more well known and having a bit more of an authority in the space, or do you think that the more distractions now is because you're now getting real into the grips of, I say the peak of your career, but I know you're always looking to learn more, that you're getting better at being social, so more of these things are becoming apparent to you?
Yeah, I think that ultimately there are things that come along with being successful that you don't realize might be challenges. And I don't think that there's any greater challenge in your life than learning how to navigate dealing with other human beings and relationships. And I just didn't have that many relationships with other human beings younger. Like when you really get into addiction and what's going on there, it's really based on you choose to have a deep relationship with something that is not a human relationship, because human relationships have been so non-rewarding that your brain selects to have an intimate relationship with something that's not a human relationship. Other humans are not worth getting involved with. Like alcohol is a better relationship in the beginning than any person you've ever met.
It's as well, I suppose, right? It's like you can always have a drink. It's always a consistent thing. Whereas
that's exactly
it. Uncertainty with people, you never know.
That's 100% it. And when you get into all of these bonding and attachment things, I had a very inconsistent bonding and attachment profile. And that's the worst case scenario that you can have, where it's like you don't know if the person is going to be very angry and aggressive, or they're going to be nice, or it's just this unpredictable human being. And as a result, like, you really have to be on your toes all the time. It feels like you're walking through a minefield or something like that, and you have to navigate it perfectly. And so your brain, it's just like, oh fuck, it's so stressful, and you really can't figure out like any particular pattern on what other human beings represent and how to get close to them. It's just not something that you can solve for, despite your brain, a young plastic brain that's capable of learning at a very high level. That's the thing you're trying to learn to the highest degree you possibly can. And ultimately you give up on it because it's impossible to learn. But you still, as a human being, crave a deep relationship. And you finally find something that is consistent, that gives a response that's strong, and that you can return to over and over again. And at a certain point, the relationship itself becomes essentially abusive, and you have more problems as a result of it than you did before it. But it's still like you have a memory implanted in you of a time in which this relationship was giving you the thing that you so sorely lacked. And then it's, you have to, then it's recovery time. But ultimately, like, the roots of all forms of addiction are based on that. And so it's kind of difficult. Like, once you get to the point where you're no longer reliant on a substance, yeah, you kicked alcohol or drugs, but it hasn't gotten to the root of, like, your relationship issues and your trust problems and all these other things. That's still sitting there, and it still sets you up in the, down the road to experience all kinds of troubles in your life. It's always, they always talk about, like, congratulations, you kicked alcohol. Now the really hard work begins, because under the surface, there's all of this inability to kind of bond with other people and have real relationships with other people. And you probably have like resentments that boil up over the top, and anger issues that are through the roof, and sadness, and all of these things that, like, create these really confusing relationships with other people. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm going in terms of, like, there are problems that you don't even foresee coming in your life that are usually in the form of other people, or your relationships within working organizations, or anything, and it's kind of like, those are issues that I've faced tremendously in my life, in a place where it would seem as though I should be in a good place from a professional standpoint. And yet I've struggled immensely with those kinds of things, which have made me more and more self-reliant. Yeah. But at the same time, it does, there's, like you said, in terms of two sides of the same coin sort of a thing, there's pros and there's cons to these things. It's kind of like, yes, I can manage to have tremendous self-reliance and think of things that can get me out of a jam very effectively. And I can think of having a vision on a business concept that I can create, or something I can develop. But oftentimes it isolates me more and more by myself on days. And that can be problematic in terms of your overall life and your well-being. Yeah. So it's hard to define success sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I can certainly relate to that. Like, I've had, you mentioned things, like, whether it's work organizations, or whether it's just inconsistent things with friendships and relationships in general, that I know that in the past I've thrown myself so far into my work, into something that I can control, I can study, I can do this. And it almost that becomes my identity. And sometimes that makes any setbacks in that realm harder to deal with, because it's not just a knock to the personal connection. It's a knock to who I built myself and my coping mechanism as a person, I suppose. Do you feel like this wanting to have better human connection, be better at this, is this part of the reason why you chose, what is a social job? Like, how do you navigate personal training, which is, I know great, knowledgeable personal trainers that struggle to get results with their clients, not because they're not very good, but because they can't connect interpersonally. Now, you've mentioned this is something you struggle with, but you've had great success. So how do you navigate around a very social career?
Well, I always tried to compensate for some things. I think, sometimes the word compensation gets a bad rap. I think that compensations oftentimes are ways in which you can find incredible solutions that might have very far-reaching, value. And I can remember years ago, I wrote an article. I don't even think you can get the thing anymore. It was like a website that existed and then didn't exist, and it was attached to that thing. But it was called How to Make a Lot of Money in Personal Training. And in it, I kind of acknowledged, look, I have a hard time with interacting with a lot of clients. It's almost like, I don't know what the hell they want to talk about. I have, in some ways, a small bandwidth of topics that I really want to talk to people about, and it's kind of like you get people in Manhattan and it's like, I don't know what your interests are, but if they're in art or music or those, I got nothing for you. Yeah, I've seen paintings before. Sure. And then they mention certain artists and I'm like, yeah, no idea.
I remember listening to I think it was an old power hour of yours. It was certainly some public speaking you did where you talked about people speaking to you about accountants, and you related that back to training. It's like, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm like, man, this guy is speaking my life. The moment it's Bitcoin, people want to talk about Bitcoin. I'm like, I don't even know what a Bitcoin is.
Right.
What is this?
Yeah, it's tough, and I see other people that are so adept at just knowing how to be so good in that area. And I just didn't really have it. And I feel like, you can get a little bit better in those areas, but there's a floor and a ceiling to your performance. And my ceiling is just not that tremendous when it comes to that one-on-one interaction in a personal training realm. I'm good with people that are very interested in fitness as a topic and sometimes sports. But outside of that, it's kind of yeah. So seen any good series on Netflix lately? It's that's all I got really.
Yeah.
And then so my solution to it was, okay, well, when people are socially awkward and they have to be in social situations, what do they usually do? They usually drink and take drugs. Okay. Why do they do that? They're looking for mind alteration. So if I want to make this person feel more comfortable with me, I'm going to be the exercise drug dealer. And what do I essentially have in the offerings of making someone receive sort of a drug stimulus through exercise? Well, there's stimulants, which come from epinephrine and norepinephrine. And you're going to get that with a hard cardiovascular response. And then there are also opioids, which come on the kind of the back end, the runner's high or that kind of post experience. So it was I know that higher intensity exercise and with an aerobic element, a significant cardiac challenge, is going to create kind of the cocktail for social lubrication that is going to be really nice for this experience. So I just kind of constructed a few really simplistic sorts of circuits that I could use with new people, because new people in personal training, number one, they're not going to do anything right. Number two, it's if you try to do real strength training with them, they're too weak for it to be of effect in any way, shape, or form. If you try to teach them anything that's going to require any coordination or motor skill, forget it. You clearly haven't worked enough in personal training, because the people that come for personal training don't know how to exercise, and they were probably the last kid picked in gym class. So they don't have high proficiency or talent or aptitude in this direction. And then because I see people trying to do these very sophisticated movement drills, and I'm like, this guy can't even tie his shoes. Why are you trying to get them to do the world's greatest stretch? Bad choice for this individual, like clearly a bad choice. So, I did things that were always metric based, because the more that you focus on numbers and hitting very specific numerical goals, there's dopamine. And it's kind of like, if you really want, like if you look at the effects of cocaine on a human brain, cocaine is just a dopamine agonist. If you look at crystal meth, for instance, crystal meth is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So we love dopamine in our brains. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you something like, here's kind of like the protocol I used that I just fell in love with was 3 minutes on the assault bike. Just hitting 1 mile on the assault bike, which would take most people about 3 minutes. And it's very metric driven. So people become very focused on the metric and they work pretty hard. Following that, I'd have them do 20 push-ups, 20 squats with the kettlebell, and 20 deadlifts with the kettlebell. And it's like, I'm not worried about them from a technique perspective, because it's a 25-pound kettlebell. Like, they're not going to hurt themselves. Even if it's the world's worst squat and the worst jumbo shrimp bent back deadlift, it's too light to hurt themselves with. I've watched people pick up luggage at the airport that are very out of shape and not hurt themselves. It's like you almost have to have done a lot of work and earned the right to hurt your back in some ways. When people aren't paying attention and they're not lifting a lot of weight, they're probably not going to register back pain in the exercise response. So it's like, just give me some good effort, and this is going to recruit some muscles, and it's going to challenge your physiology. And then after that, we had the self-propelled treadmill, and I'd have them go 0.25 miles on that. And both the bike and the treadmill would take approximately 3 minutes, and the stuff in the middle would take anywhere between 3 and 6 minutes, depending upon the person. So one round of this would be anywhere between 9 and 14 minutes, give or take. And I would usually have people try to do 2 rounds, and they would accumulate anywhere between like 19 and 27 minutes of continuous work doing this. And I would let them break as they wanted to, get water, but it really did create a chemical response in people. And you could see them voluntarily start talking to you from an emotional place. And once that emotional place is elicited in the other person, there's all kinds of data and psychology about how if you have an emotionally stimulated environment, that is how people will form more of a bond with you. And if you look at the data on, acquiring a new gym member, like that's just a whole branch of science. The number one variable on that which causes gyms to acquire a new member is the rapidity at which they gain their first friend. Like that blows away every other variable. It's not even funny. If you go to a gym and you make a friend on the first day, you're going to stick with that gym. And I have an advantage as a personal trainer where they are with me for an hour, and hopefully I can become their friend within that first hour. And I'm like, man, I'm not that great at making friends as a person, but I bet you if I create the right chemical environment for this person, that it's almost like from a scientific standpoint, it's almost like how you would cause like a baby goose to like bond to you or something along those lines. If you just follow a certain formula, it'll probably happen. And I did find it to be successful. And again, it's like a compensatory mechanism, but I'm like, hey man, there's a lot of really shitty drug dealers with terrible personalities, and they still have people calling them up all the time and trying to be their best friend. And it's like, if it works in this realm, it'll probably work in this realm.
Yeah.
And I still think that it doesn't have to be exactly that formula, but something along those lines where you give people that emotional response and that chemical environment, and you're going to greatly increase the chances that person's going to stick with you.
I think it's know your target market as well, right? You in Pipe Gym, we should be not too far, I presume, from Wall Street. And people there are going to be quite numbers, quite finance driven. They're going to be guys that are looking at targets all day. You giving them a target in the gym, you're speaking their language without having to speak their language.
We don't really get the finance guys there. They, like in New York, you don't go outside of like a 5-block radius for the most part. You know, Union Square is a weird mishmash of people. So you literally don't know what's going to come in, you know? And like my roster was kind of like, I had a anesthesiologist. I had a guy that ran his own AV company. I had a guy that created a pretty successful burrito chain globally. I had someone that was a New York Times best-selling author. I had someone that ran a what do you call it with the like a neurotropic supplement line? Featuring like some kind of specific mushroom. I had someone who was in a family that owned some professional sports teams. I had, you know, someone that ran their own supplement company. I had a lot of other trainers as clients. Mm-hmm. You know, my roster was more of a mixed bag than probably anybody else's that I was aware of. Yeah. And I don't even work at Hype anymore. I've been out of there for a number of months now. Yeah. So it's like, I don't do any personal training anymore. I have 0 clients that I work with in person. I completely have switched over to a digital framework for business now. And that was kind of something that really I didn't even necessarily choose. It became, it just sort of merged that way with schedule demands and other factors that were, you know, a lot of just issues with the gym as well. So it just happened over time in that manner.
These things tend to happen for the right reason, right? You tend to find that these things happen at a time where you're about to break through. It's weird that things come full circle. And I think with that varied roster, I always think when it comes to the making friends with clients thing, I quite like this approach that you do, because one of the biggest things it drives me mental when I'm mentoring coaches and when I'm speaking to personal trainers, it's like, yes, you want to be friends with your clients, but so many people become renter friends where, okay, you may be friends now in the session by catering them too much, but the biggest way to ruin a friendship with a client is to feel like the client feels like you've wasted their time and money. So if you want to forge long-term relationships, that first thing in your head should be providing them a result. If you then connect with them on an interpersonal level, bonus. But if you don't, at least they respect the process and they like you for what you do. And doing something like, as you say, creating that response that works mentally as well as physically, teaching them how to do a bracing exercise. There's a million bracing exercises you do that are brutal without moving. And I can imagine a client who's so used to doing big compound lifts all the time and comes in and goes, wow, I don't even need to move. And this is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's just something that goes, right, this guy's serious. This guy knows what he's talking about. And I trust him. Yeah. And then the rest will come later.
Yeah. I mean, there were times like I've had people that I've acquired as a result of them having some kind of chronic pain problem. And they were unable to train as a result of that. And, oftentimes it would just be like, being able to knock it out the first time seeing them and to be able to, in that same session, like knock them out of whatever was going on and give them access to be able to train the movements that used to be really problematic for them. And these would be people that have like seen everybody. Yeah. And then it's like, man, this was like a very easy solution. I don't know what the other people are doing here, but like, it's just literally following the basics of anatomy and understanding like, what you were doing that was a problem and eliminating that and providing you with an exercise that didn't feature that. Like, it was not necessarily like these rocket science things, but the amount of trust that someone gains in you as a result of doing something like that is very powerful, and that like, for me gaining new clients, it's almost like I categorize everything. You know what I mean? Like I always kind of take an empirical approach to everything that I possibly can. And so when it came to like client acquisition, it was always like, I remember I originally came to New York. I was supposed to be the director of education for Peak Performance. And one of the first things that I did, I was director of education and training methodology. So when I first came, I actually thought there were going to be a lot of athletes that train there. That's really what I thought it was. Zero athletes. You know what I mean? Like absolutely zero athletes. It's just like an urban rich person gym.
Yeah.
And I had zero exposure to rich urban people at that point in time in my life. And so I was like, whoa, what is this population? Like, this lady is complaining about being late because the stable boy didn't like rope her horse up. I don't even have the right words. You know what I mean? Like, there were different people that kind of came in, but there were like certain groups of them that were more similar to each other than others. And I created this 5 category model of different clients that were at the gym, and it was based on like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but like the top category was like individuals that demonstrate athletic proficiency and are highly motivated to train. And like we had 0 of those people. And then under that was like category 4 was kind of like individuals that have desire to train, are coachable, but lack athletic proficiency. And then it was kind of like individuals that like do not have seemingly any goals, or like it was based on a few things. It was like kind of like, do they have goals? Do they have desire to train? Do they have athletic proficiency? And then it was kind of like yes or no in these things, and it led to their categorization. The most populated group that we had was like people that do not have definable goals, that are not particularly coachable, and that are not motivated to train. Like, and that's like, oh, wow, this is a tough group. Like, and this is the majority of the humans that are in here as well. And like, that was just because look, like that was a gym where like billionaires walked around it, and like the concubines of billionaires walked around it. And it was kind of like, you're going to spend your day with like 6 sessions that are with like women that are anywhere between 22 years old and 35 years old that literally live imaginary lives, and like there may be like Manhattan socialites that are, like they're so removed from your reality as a regular person that it's like you can't relate to them. And fitness is like number 62 in their list of priorities, but at the same time, they're very concerned with how they look. It was just a very perplexing thing. And like, people that will veto your choices as a professional and blame you for anything that goes wrong for them, despite the fact that it's like clearly like, dietary based factors and alcohol consumption and things like that. But it's like, look, like we measured you, you've actually lost muscle mass. You haven't bulked up from the, 0.25 training sessions per week that you do. Like you've gained, 4.5 pounds of fat over the last year. And your diet logs are all incomplete, not filled out. And so like you have 0 adherence and compliance to training, 0 adherence and compliance to diet. And you have 100% outsourcing of blame for your body composition deterioration. Like, I don't know what to do with you, but that's all you really see hour after hour as clients. Yeah. Now, Hype Gym was different. It wasn't billionaires and people like that. It was much more regular people. And they're a lot easier to work with. They actually were kind of like more dialed in and a little bit more motivated. It's still kind of like, it ultimately is this process of taking people that generally evaluate their exercise through subjective lenses and trying to gradually move them more and more over to an objective lens to evaluate things with. And I had more tools to be able to do that with than anybody probably in the world, because my business partner and I had developed technology that we call Strength Score that was able to be on the equipment that we use to train people. Yeah. So I could have someone do a set and it would display the mechanical work associated with the set. And as a result of that, like, it factors in the load, the repetitions, and the range of motion for that. And literally that's all there is to it. You know, if you over time do more load, repetitions, range of motion sets, you will drive progressive overload. And if you're driving progressive overload, that is the thing, if put into a program, will create adaptations in your body. Plain and simple. That's all there is to it. Like, it's not the most complicated situation in the world. Are you doing more than you did before? And if you consistently do that over time, it's impossible to not see results. It's just impossible. It's just how this works. And so people that came in with bizarre or completely subjective sensory chasing minds in the beginning gradually were able to transition over to understanding that if we create this progressive quantitative approach, it leads somewhere, because they would actually see like tremendous changes to themselves. And then it opens the discussion to being like, hey, by the way, food works the same way, you know, because it's kind of like, hey, you know how you always come in with just only subjective reportings about food? Like, oh, I ate bad this weekend. Well, what does bad mean? You know, like, oh, I ate this thing. Well, how much of that thing did you eat? Yeah. And it's kind of like, look, if you have a goal, if you have a weight loss goal, we have to have a progressive overload approach to decreasing calories over time. If you want to gain muscle, we have to have a progressive overload approach to increasing calories over time. It's the same thing as training. If it's all the same thing. And the moment that you begin to realize that this is all just a big spreadsheet, and all you have to do is to continue to move the spreadsheet cells up and to the right, you're going to get there. That's it. That's the whole game. And everything that you do that detracts from those spreadsheet cells moving up and to the right, that's getting in your way. And that's the name of the game. That's all there is to this. And the detractors come in many shapes and forms. They come in the form of sleep. They come in the form of, work stress. They come in the form of, non-consistency and adherence to training. They come in the form of weekend food binges. They come in the form of not enough food. It's all the same stuff, but you don't realize the impact and import of it until you begin to really quantitatively analyze things and follow the trajectory of a quantitative drive.
I think that's the biggest thing to try and get people accustomed to is finding strategies to make it simple enough for them to get started looking at some of this stuff. Because when you're looking at these people, often it's a hesitation to tracking. It's a justification that they don't want to admit to themselves what they're actually doing that's caused them to fuck up. Like, I get it all the time where it's like, the biggest thing is social occasions. Like, they get good with tracking and they go out for dinner and they go, I didn't know how to track that. And that all of a sudden justified them a 12-inch pizza. Like, it's not like, was there a salad on that menu? No, I couldn't track one slice of pizza, so I had to have 16 slices. It's like, you already made your mind up. You weren't following this. And I think when I work with someone like that, my goal is, all right, I ain't going to say anything about what you have. All I want you to do next time is track all 16 slices. Yeah. And then you can come to a conclusion. You go, I didn't even realize how many calories that was. I don't want to do it again. I always call it the Snickers bar analogy, right? I ain't going to tell my clients you can't have a Snickers bar. But if you put your Snickers bar into your, tracking app and you go, wow, that's that many calories. Now, I can have that, but I'm going to be hungry. Am I okay with that? Yeah, eat the fucking Snickers bar. Or, you know what? No, it's not fucking worth it. Then I don't have to tell you not to eat it. You've come to that conclusion. And it all comes from being honest and actually tracking this stuff. And then you have
It really
control.
does.
Structure creates freedom.
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I think that, you hear all this stuff about like, oh, well, tracking leads to like these, behavioral problems and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I don't know if you actually tracked anything. Most of the people that like say those things have not really measured and tracked and actually done the work. Like a lot of times I've had so many people where it's like, first of all, it's kind of like, if you're telling me that you don't have any goals, that's fine. I'm not going to put goals on you. That's not my place, not my right. Like if you come in and you say, look, I just want to work out and feel good, fine. I'm okay with that. I'm still going to measure it for my own sake because I need to track your volume so I don't hurt you. And so that I have a good idea of what's actually a good idea for you in terms of total amount of work. But you don't even really need to know that. Like I'll just do that on my own and keep notes so that I don't progress you too fast, or I'm aware of what else you're doing in your life so that I don't, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis parts of people's lives. If you don't know about that stuff and you try to lump too much training volume on them in their training week, that's an easy way to jack somebody up and set them up for injuries and other problems. So I just need to know kind of what their life is like. But I'm just, if like I've had plenty of people that are like, yeah, I really don't have goals necessarily. Mm-hmm. I know that I should work out, and I'm just here because I like to work out. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm totally fine with that. And they're like, I'm not looking to do anything to change my body composition. So it's like, okay, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to push weird dietary stuff on you at all. But that's a rarity. Most people are saying, hey, I do have these goals. And I'm like, okay, well, if you have goals, I'm going to lead you at the best approach that I can for you. And a lot of times it is weight loss. And if it's weight loss, like, it's kind of like you have to decrease calories. And the question is, how are you going to do that? And to me, the poor approaches are like kind of the following ones, like intermittent fasting, keto, vegan, carnivore, paleo, anything that's like that. I'm like, can it work? Absolutely. There's a million examples of people that have followed any of these things and they've all worked. Okay. But to me, it's actually like, if we begin to just measure, it actually opens up the door for way more options,
100%. And I also think when you're looking at, we're saying about people saying that tracking creates these bad emotional connections to food. And that is like saying, going back to the start of this podcast, that's like saying alcohol is the problem for the addiction issues that you faced, rather than things that were going on socially and inside you that made you want to grab the alcohol. You aren't going to stop saying beer is the problem, because plenty of people have beer without issues. And exactly. I think when you look at those, like, people going into these follower approaches, like you say, I think sometimes they create more problems with your emotional state with food, because now you go, carbs are the problem, eating after 6 is the problem, vegetables are the problem. So I'm team cannibal diet, but like cannibal diet. What am I looking for? But yeah, anyway, so the cannibal.
Cannibal. That's a new one.
That's
a great way to lose weight. You can only eat other human flesh.
Yeah, but like, whereas if you track, and people think that's motivation, that shows you can have, to a degree, whatever you want. But you've just got to weigh up the pros and cons. And I think that's a much more, like, I'm like, 5-6 weeks post photo shoot, got myself pretty lean. And in this situation now, I had a Subway cookie because I really fucking like them. But that doesn't change. The rest of my diet all fits in. I don't feel I'm restricted from anything. But if I went low carb, I now think bread is the problem. And that's what it to be.
And the other thing is that you realize, like, most times, if I'm even somewhere in the ballpark of 80%, 85% compliant, I'm going to get the majority of the results I'm looking for. It's really not the end of the world if I have 1 or 2 meals a week that are not tracked, that are clearly like, indulgent kinds of things, going out to eat or something like that. and if you do that, don't punish yourself over it. Just get back on the plan that you were on before. And it's probably going to wash itself out. Like, don't overreact, don't underreact, but just stick to your plan for the most part. When you want to do something that's social, like, do that, and again, like, as long as you're like in the ballpark of, look, and if you have extreme goals, if you are a fitness professional that does photo shoots, you might have to be more than 85% compliant. You might have to be 95% compliant. But be honest with yourself. Are you actually prepping for a photo shoot? Like, probably not. You know what I mean? Like, if you're just trying to lose weight, like, most people that walk in that are 30 pounds overweight, and males that are like over 20% body fat, and females that are over 30% body fat, it's low-hanging fruit. Okay. Let's just get you, and again, I actually like tracking even for them in the beginning, because it literally just puts them on a schedule.
Yeah.
Like
awareness as well, right? I know people had 1,000 calories worth of sauce. I've known people track 1 ounce of steak. I'm like, who the fuck eats 1 ounce of steak? I've seen 11 and a half cashews. Like, did you break the cashew nut in half? You just had a handful and you didn't track it. And like, I think it's quite important you mentioned about you only need to be 80-85% to get that low hanging fruit. When you see clients come in and go, hey, you've not dropped this week to the rate we're looking at. Is there anything you need to tell me? Maybe I had a little bit more chicken one day. Bullshit.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Being open and honest with yourself is like, how big are those scoops of peanut butter?
Right.
It's no way.
Yeah, you really do learn that stuff. Like, oh yeah, well, I didn't really put in the 3 ounces of half and half that went into this like latte thing. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, man, you like completely missed like, I had like a half a stick of butter on the English muffins that I was spread on there. It's like, yeah, you're missing out on
tracked. Like,
yeah, like, oh, I didn't know I had to do that part of it. Yeah, it's like, okay. And it really does expose these areas where people are like completely like unconscious in that, like,
or justifying. And the other one I sometimes get is like, they won't track every Saturday. And it goes, oh, maybe it was the butter that I had, like you said, to spread it on the muffins. I'm like, hey, where's the food tracking on Saturday? Oh, that's my cheat day. Well, let's fucking go.
Yeah, we're missing. You realize there's only 7 of these days in a week, right? Like, that's a big percentage of them. Like, it's funny because, I know that in the beginning you were mentioning like this is a podcast and interview that's based around like how to become successful. Like are there common denominators with that? And in a lot of ways, I do think that it is ultimately over time, like learning how to accept and exist in kind of the greatest understanding of reality that you can, and that is something that unfolds over time. And there's so many blind spots that we have as human beings and that are very difficult to look at. There's parts of yourself that are difficult to look at. There's parts of your life that are difficult to look at. And ultimately, I do think that like, if you have that willingness to be a better receiver of information and to really acknowledge what that information means, and then to create actionable steps of new behaviors based on solving for the problematic components of the information you're taking in, that's probably where you're going to see success in your life. And it's just hard to do that. Like, it's really hard to like hold your eyes open and to look at yourself and to look at your life and really fucking look at it. You know what I mean? Like, most people, I really think, like, want to spend their life like an ostrich with their head in the sand and not face the hard truths, not face those hard elements of themselves, and not hold the mirror up to themselves. It's so much easier to look through the window and blame other people, or to do whatever, focus on, like, if you have resentments against other people, just spend your life obsessing and focusing on that person rather than being like, you know what, like, what am I doing? I'm wasting all my time, like, being upset about this other person and hating on them. Why? Like, what have I done with my day today? I've done nothing, like, instead of that, like turn the mirror back on yourself and start to put in more actions and steps towards actually doing something with your own life and creating something of your own in that area. And it's fucking hard to do that. You know, I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it's calorically more expensive for your brain to do that rather than to just stay in old patterns of thought and repetitious sorts of things. It's probably challenging energetically to redirect and refocus and create novel behaviors and things like that. You know, but ultimately it probably is one of these things that like you front load the work and you have back end easier time and success. You know, I spent a lot of time with habit formation stuff a number of years ago, and you get to the point with that information where you realize like the majority of your day is habitually driven. You know, it's like you are a product of your habits, and we have plenty of terrible habits and plenty of good habits. And, you know, if you can just go in and unpack your bad habits and change really almost one at a time and redirect it towards being a good habit that replaces the bad habit, you're probably going to end up with a really successful life. But the hard part with habits is breaking and then creating a new habit in the beginning. There's so much resistance to it and struggle and conflict and this and that. And it's like, you know, if you can, you know, I think a lot of this stuff, like I think in the modern world, we've lost the teachings and the wisdom of the ancient world, you know, and the ancient world is full of discussion regarding the nature of human existence is ultimately rooted in suffering, you know, and the ability to suffer is a path towards enlightenment. You know, I mean, that is the Buddha, that is Christ, all of those things are like direct trying to teach us that like, if you turn a blind eye to your own suffering and you try to live a superficial life that's based on very short-term happiness and indulgence, you are missing the big picture. Like the kingdom of heaven and the path to enlightenment will never be yours because you're existing in this kind of like very low tier, low frequency purgatory or hell world. And the only way to crack through is through your own suffering. And you just aren't willing to actually sit through it for any period of time. But if you do, like the thing that you like, we all desire to not suffer on a fundamental level. And we build in all of these behaviors and distractions to take us away from suffering, whether it be boredom or, you know, like, but existence is not easy for anybody on this planet. It's not easy. But if you have the willingness to actually sit in some of that discomfort and pain, not run from it, accept it, take it in, you will process it and move forward through it. And you will be able to replace previously kind of deleterious habits and behaviors and patterns. You can replace those things with much more effective things, much deeper things. And as a person, you'll continue to ascend in life. You know, it's just not easy. And a lot of people aren't built for it anymore. You know, we have so many low tier drips of low level pleasure. It's ridiculous, you know, whether that be Instagram or just checking any app on your phone or whatever, rather than like actually legitimate getting to know yourself in your own mind and in your own emotional state in quiet and in reflection and in difficult circumstances, and being able to push yourself through hard work that's challenging. Those are the really challenging things that will move you forward as a person and have you be someone that ultimately feels a lot of pride in themselves and develops a lot of self-worth and self-esteem.
Yeah.
And, I just think that however it is that you're going to define success, because it's like you could define it by having a lot of money, being famous. To me, those are not elements of success. Elements of success are when you reach states of really high levels of self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-actualization, and when you're the best caretaker of your own life on a day-to-day basis that you can be.
Yeah, there's so much there that I sort of agree with. And you say it's the hard thing to do is sitting with that discomfort. And you always see it, going back to some of the client archetypes you see, is that you see that really overly anxious person that doesn't think they're stressed, but they come in shaking like they're on speed. And you suggest the idea of maybe, how about going for a walk? How about meditating? How about just going on one of those flotation tanks? No, I don't have time for that. Hate them. Why do you hate them? Because you just can't shut yourself away from what's going on there. And our brain puts up barriers. And I think that's why training is such a good medium for this. Because one time it's like, if someone's got this anticipation about going to the gym that scares them, I often say, just go do one set. Because it's the thought of doing it that's worse than actually doing it. And when you're there, you're set. And when you start to push, it teaches you in a 60 to 90 seconds worth of a set. That is not, at the grand scheme of how hard work is in other avenues of life, it's so small. It's certainly manageable if you've got someone over your shoulder. But that teaches you how to embrace discomfort in a way I don't think very few things actually do. And that's why I often see people get results in the gym tend to embrace things in other areas of their life too.
Yeah, and it's not like you immediately see the results from it either. Like it's kind of like if you're gaining muscle mass, we're talking about gaining grams of muscle mass per week
while hiding body fat in the surface.
Yeah, like it's gonna take time. It's like someone putting water into a pot, putting on the heat, and starting to yell at it right away because it's not boiling.
Yeah,
it's kind of like it's gonna take a little bit of time, but when it goes, now it's bubbling and going crazy. You know what I mean? And it's the same damn thing with these physiological changes. Like, don't yell at the pot in the first 10 seconds of the heat being applied to it. It's going through a phase transition. It needs a whole state change. It's like putting a seed in the ground and being like, why isn't it a full-grown tree yet? Man, it's been in the ground for 2 days. It's going to take some time. And once it gets some momentum and gets going, it's going to flourish and you're going to see some changes that are pretty impressive day after day. But like, you got to give it some time. Yeah. And you have to let the thing actually go through its timeline and process. And like, that requires belief. It requires some determination. It requires actually following the right process. And it will be uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I always say, you don't want to take the whole of your day, but some semi-quick fire questions to finish off on, and feel free to make these bigger answers if you want to. We spoke earlier on about the struggles you had and getting yourself out of a hole. And I think the way that a lot of the message that my brand has sort of gone into is going into helping men build confidence in themselves. Because I do think there's something where men's mental health is something that's becoming much bigger an issue over the years. If somebody, male or female, I suppose, is in a hole and is struggling, from someone who's got themselves out of it themselves, what would be the one biggest piece of advice you'd give to somebody who?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, I'm honestly, in my life, I'm coming out of some very difficult times and some depression and stuff like that. And I feel like really only very, very recently, I mean, I'm talking in the last week or two, is where I'm starting to kind of really feel like I'm emerging from that. And I think that ultimately it's a realization. I've given this talk and this analogy before about going up a mountain, like actually dealing with a mountain. And with it's kind of like, look, like most people in life, you can't go straight up the side of a mountain. Like, we're not that dude that climbed Half Dome. Like, that's just, there's like one guy that was able to do that, and he's a different specimen. They're making a movie about him. Like, let's just assume that we're just all regular people when it comes to this. And if you want to go up a mountain, you basically have to walk around it in concentric circles that are going to ascend up the mountain. And with that, it's kind of like you're going to go around this thing. And what you'll find is that you'll keep encountering like a really good side and a tougher side. You know, the good side, it's got grass and the sun hits it really well. And there's little bunnies hopping around and the whole thing. And the bad side is like always dark and rocky and craggy. And, you know, it's got slippery steps and that whole thing. And look, like if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, what you're going to find is you're going to keep coming to the good side, the bad side, the in-between sides, that whole thing. That's life. There's never going to be a time where you're just only on the good side of the mountain. Like it doesn't work that way. But on the flip side, like you're not going to be on the bad side of the mountain forever. You just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And because the whole key here is to be trying to go up the mountain. And as you go up the mountain, the interesting thing is, as you're reaching these peaks, it goes faster and faster in terms of like being on the good side, the bad side. Like the challenges actually become more significant in a lot of ways. And the air is thinner and the slope becomes more dramatic. And so it's almost like, you know, the goal here is to get to the top. It's not to just, there are these kind of significant points that you can get to. And look, like there's always another realm of the mountain after that. But there are points where you're like, I actually reached a different level, you know, and then you might be there for a little bit and then begin another climb and another phase of your life or something like that with another good side, bad side. But really, to me, the difference is you're going to keep encountering the same kinds of stuff in your life. The difference is that as you go higher up, your perspective becomes more clear. You know, you're able to see farther out. You're able to see and appreciate the process that got you where you are. And you're also at that point able to remember that there's been a good side and a bad side. So that to me is a really important thing. And the other part of this is it's a lot of work to go up it. You know what I mean? And like each step doesn't seem like it's getting you anywhere, but if you keep going, you'll keep making this climb, but it's very easy to go down. You know, it doesn't take any skill to slide straight down the side of a mountain. And that can be painful and difficult. And a lot of times people will slide a really long way and then they'll just give up right there. They won't try to get back up and go through the same process and climb it again. But to me, it's like, this is life in a lot of ways. Like nobody else is going to climb that thing for you. Nobody. Like you have to climb your own mountain and you have to encounter the good side and the shadow side, and you have to recognize them for what they are. And you have to just keep moving and understanding that there is, you can either go forward or you can slide. Like, because you can't stay in the same spot on a mountain. The ground will give way under you. Like, it's just not built for static stuff. It's just not. That's not life. It's not a static process. You're either going up or you're going down. And sometimes you can find other people that are there to go on that walk with you. And they can be incredibly beneficial. You know, like some people have great energy and they can really kind of give you a boost as you're going through this thing. And maybe they know like, hey, there's this little path over here that's a little bit easier. And they can remind you when you're in a tough spot to be like, yeah, you know what, you are in a tough spot, but I really think you got to keep going. And then there are other people that you'll encounter that will drag you down. It's like all of a sudden you find yourself carrying your pack and their pack for them. And you might be trying to drag them up the mountain. And in reality, they're trying to either stay where they are or bring you down. And you might have to cut bait on them and say, look, like this is not helping me do what I need to do on this mountain. And that can be really difficult because you might really like parts of that person. but they might not be the right fit for helping you go in the direction you need to go in. And they might even be like the whole time being like, man, we're not going up this mountain appropriately. And it's your fault. It's because you didn't tell me about the glare over on this side. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. And before you know it, you're like, man, I feel terrible. And my motivation to go up this mountain has really been taken away from me. And it's like you all of a sudden throw that person out, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow. Like, I didn't realize that, like, I was just carrying around all this extra weight, and now I'm able to go right up there. So I think that, like, that to me is such an important analogy that I return to all the time in my mind about when things aren't going well. It's kind of like, okay, am I still putting one foot in front of the other? Like, because I'm on the hard side of this mountain right now, but I need to just remember I won't always be here. It won't always feel this way. There is another side to this thing. And am I just getting bogged down here because of, like, my companions are kind of undermining me at this point in time? Can I hook up with some other people that have some energy and that are, like, actively trying to get around this thing a little bit more effectively? And so, like, I really think that that's something that paints an easier picture to understand as compared to, like, the actuality of real life.
Yeah.
But it's a nice picture that I think can be really as a useful model, because sometimes, like, reality is just so intricate and complex and tangled that it's like you don't know how to proceed. But if you are able to think about it from this perspective, if I'm able to think about it from that perspective and make those decisions, then I end up feeling as though I make more progress, and I treat the difficult times more appropriately with acceptance, and I treat the easier good times more appropriately and have success as well.
Yeah. I love that. And to give you respect for how much that resonated with me, you probably saw me typing for a second there, and I never do. I hate doing that on shows, so I want to be present and listen. But never in over 50 episodes have I had somebody that's had such a good analogy that I've written notes during it and it will change the episode title of the show. That was phenomenal. To sort of close off with one last question before we find out where to find you and your courses and things like this. Going into fitness, if there was one thing that you think that we should do more of as an industry, whether it's coaches or people wanting to get in shape and what they should do for their health, and one thing we should get rid of in the fitness industry, who's the person dragging the industry down we need to cut? Maybe not a person, but a thing. What would that be for you? Best thing and worst thing?
That's a really challenging question. I think, I'm friends with Bill Hartman, who I think is just such a brilliant mind, incredible physical therapist. And I can remember at one point in time him saying to me, like, I kind of wish the personal trainers and the strength coaches didn't learn so much of, like, the, like, rehab oriented anatomy and approaches like that. Like, it'd just be so much easier if they just actually trained people and did fitness stuff and just got really good at that and didn't worry about all the corrective stuff. Because it's almost like it's you have to be so precise and talented when it comes to, like, the approach to change. Like, to me, it's always like, I need a category, I need a definition, I need an outcome that's specific for intervention, and, like, to me, I have exercises that I refer to as fitness developing exercises and exercises that are core exercises. And core exercises do not develop fitness to me. What they do is they have the potential to change table tests for range of motion.
Yeah.
And that is the reason that they exist for me. And I try to craft the core exercise to the person based on my table testing of that person.
Yeah.
And if I table test them, categorize them correctly, and construct the right core exercise for them, I see dramatic changes in their pre to post table test. And I see their range of motion improve incredibly. And now in my mind, I've given them access to being able to do fitness exercises. Like they are now coachable and capable of doing these things with competency. And if they can do competent fitness exercises, now I just follow classical exercise science, and I utilize the right amount of tension, volume, and progressive overload to be able to create adaptations.
Yeah.
And I don't try to reinvent the wheel. I just utilize progressive overload and, appropriate levels of progress, back off, progress that are fairly classical and I am fairly boring when it comes to my actual program design. It doesn't mean it's easy. It just means that it's straightforward, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When it comes to things like what you would describe in your pillars as sagittal plane competency, things that allow people to move in a better way, be able to generate more force. The aim of that is it's there to eliminate it almost as quickly as possible so you can do something that's actually going to create the actual goal and stimulus you like with being safe. It's not something where you're doing dead bugs for 4 years because of somebody showed it online. On the topic of Bill Hartman, very small question. What is neuro coffee, and is it as perfect as he always says it is?
I've had neuro coffee a couple of times. It's strong. Like I remember just being like, whoa, like I was ready to come unglued. Yeah, Mike Rousseau makes neuro coffee, or he's like part of the team with it.
Okay.
And he's a really smart dude, like in that nutrition world, and like really understanding a lot of pieces that go into it. He is a very impressive individual, and like he's one of the best public speakers I have ever seen, with being able to take a lot of information and to package it in a way that's extremely useful and easy to understand. Like I always, I tell people, like, if you want a master's class in how to present information and how to speak in public, see Mike Rousseau. Like he is truly a very talented individual on that front. And he's a good businessman as well. And I know that he's part of the process of creating the formula for neuro coffee. And Bill is a huge fan of it. And Bill is a very regimented routine individual. So it will always have exactly the same profile of him, drank in exactly the same way, placed in exactly the same place.
Same cup, same fiery jumper, same cap. There we go. That's it. I love it. If it's strong, if it makes you come unglued, it's probably going to be a great thing for me.
It gets you firing on a lot of cylinders. Yeah.
That sounds perfect. So thank you this has generally been it did not go in any way the direction that I was thinking coming onto this, but it's generally been one of my favorite episodes. So thank you very much for giving me the time for this. For people who want to find you and want to learn a little bit more about you, where can people find you and what have you got coming up?
Yeah. So I think that the easiest way is probably through Instagram with my handle at Dr. Pat Davidson, Dr. Pat Davidson. There are a number of products that I currently have available. And generally speaking, it is divided between training products and education products. And the primary training product that I have is Athletic Weapon, which is an online program. It's my program. Like it's what I do in my own workouts. And I just simply make that available for anybody that wants to train with me, basically, and follow the same program that I do. And, currently it's right in the beginning of a big 22-week hypertrophy block. So doing a lot of volume and trying to put on as much muscle mass as possible. I've got a kind of a fun thing going with Don Saladino. We're training together out at his place in Long Island, and we both had DEXA exams done at the beginning of this, and we're going to see kind of who puts on the most amount of muscle across these 22 weeks. So it's pretty fun. And he's a great training partner. I mean, that dude is an animal and has incredible energy, and just like, you could not ask for a better training environment and better training partner than Don. And I'm super grateful for that right now. But yeah, I think it's a very reasonably priced product. It's $35 a month, and you get access to a PDF that describes the entire training block phase by phase. We give you an Excel sheet for tracking, and there's a community as well that has a Facebook group to be able to interact with each other and figure it out. And that's the primary training side thing that I offer. There's also a couple of books that I've written in the past, Mass and Mass 2, that are training books. Then the education side has kind of we have the Power Hour, which is a lower cost, easier item to get started with. Every week I do a 1-hour education talk, and I've been doing those for over 4 years, and you get access to every single one going all the way back to the beginning with that one. And then the other big education thing, like the major education thing, probably the biggest product I have going, is the Rethinking the Big Patterns certification series. And that is something that's just starting in 2022 here. Like, it's been a lot of time in the making, and now like the full expression of it is just getting started. So I have the book, which is called The Coach's Guide to Optimizing Movement, that explains the entire thing. That is, I would say, just like the backdrop to everything. And then in terms of the certification system with it, people start with an online seminar, and that online seminar is, it's been recorded. I believe there's 17 or 18 modules, and it brings you through all of the background theoretical stuff that makes the Rethinking the Big Patterns model what it is. There is a quiz that corresponds with that online seminar, and when people pass that quiz, now that makes them a level 1 certified coach. From there, there's 3 in-person seminars. There's control patterns, resistance patterns, and athletic patterns. Control patterns, they're all 2-day seminars. Control patterns is breathing and core exercises for the thorax and for the pelvis. So 2 days exclusively on that stuff. And the point of it is to really, the online introductory stuff is so that I don't have to teach all the background information, and that the seminars can now be very much hands-on things for 2 straight days. Because there's a lot, like, I was trying to teach all these things in one seminar before, and it was impossible. I'd never get to cover anything and not do much in the way of hands-on stuff. And to me, there's so much value in the hands-on, and like me directly coaching people like me seeing them do it and correcting and adjusting and that sort of a thing. And the other one's resistance and athletic patterns. Athletic patterns is running, jumping, change of directions, and throwing. So the major focal points there are running mechanics, sprinting technique, drills associated with that. Triple extension is Olympic style lifts and plyometrics. Change of direction is everything related to agility and drills in that vein. And then throwing is all medicine ball training. So 2 days of all of that kind of stuff put into the teaching. And the thing that differentiates it, people are like, I can just take, the weightlifting certification or something. Yes, you can, but like, where the difference to me is that all of the drills are broken down into different planes and stances with this model. And to be able to actually see what the hell a true frontal plane plyometric drill is very different than what anybody is currently doing.
Yeah.
It is a whole different experience to be able to see people learn how to create a hip shift and load into adductors and glutes prior to exploding out of their stretch reflex. And just understanding like, hey, a drill like this is a very specific drill for someone like a tennis player or a soccer player that needs to be able to do very specific kinds of movements that might be on more biased towards one leg or in a certain kind of stance that's not just doing a box jump.
Yeah.
And then the resistance patterns is your hinging, your squatting, your pressing, and your pulling. And again, what differentiates this stuff is the elements that really define frontal plane and transverse plane strength training. Because I do not see people do this stuff, period. And then when they do think that they're doing it, they're not doing it. It's like there's no understanding of what an actual hip shift is. There's no understanding of what true frontal plane centering is.
Yeah.
You know, I just never see, like, it just doesn't exist. People are unaware of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that my goal is to have people do this stuff, because as soon as I teach it in a seminar, people are like, oh my God, I have literally never felt my adductor like this in my life.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, this is frontal plane strength training. This is, yeah, I get it. Like, you haven't done this. You think you understand this. You do not understand this. And I think the more that people get exposure to it, then it becomes a normalized thing that goes through the fitness industry. And all of a sudden, real results get driven into people, like in particular, like athletes or other individuals that require strength in different planes.
Yeah.
A lot of people, if you're an aesthetic athlete or a personal training client, you do not need high levels of strength in other planes. If you are trying to win Roland Garros on clay court, you need legitimate strength in the frontal plane, and you need strength and competency in the transverse plane. And if you want to win the British Open in golf, you need mastery of these other planes and weight shifting and the ability to turn. And it's kind of like, when you understand the actual mechanics that underlie these capabilities, because they are not being taught in anything that I've seen, really. It's kind of just this eye-opening stuff. There's a reason it's called Rethinking the Big Patterns, because it's like everything that you thought you understood about that which defines a squat or a split squat, it will get eradicated, because you'll see like, oh my God, I really didn't understand what was meant or involved with truly centering the axial skeleton over one base of support, and what a real hip shift under that circumstance meant, and what it feels like, and why it's important. So I'm very excited about this group of seminars becoming a thing, and the organization of it and the ability of it to have an impact in the fitness industry. And because it really hasn't even started yet. It really hasn't. The first in-person seminar that I'll teach will be January 15th and 16th in New York. And from there, I mean, COVID is an issue, but I want to bring this global, and I want to teach as many of these seminars as I possibly can in as many places as I can.
Yeah. I know from watching your work, the things that amaze me is really getting understanding of like exercise progression, which will be another podcast in itself, where I'll be here to 2 a.m. my time talking about it. But like, progression is something that's very much not understood, because like an incline hyper, for sake of argument, to train your glutes, and a hip thrust, they're not regressions. They're different. From a stability standpoint, there's more of a demand. And it's listening to your work which really like hit home of like, okay, what do you actually mean by a progression? And I tell you what, talking about the in-person seminars, if I wasn't annoyed that we have the strictest quarantine in the world here in Hong Kong, I'm even more annoyed now that I can't get out to the US because the flights are banned, and I'll have a 3-week quarantine when I get back. But for anyone who can travel to the United States, this is well worth it. And I will put the show notes below. I'll put in all your details of all your courses, websites, and Instagram. So Pat, thank you so much. This has been so fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll tell you, as soon as I can kind of get over to Australia and Asia, I will.
Oh, mate, so, as soon as the borders open up, I'm dropping you an Instagram message saying, right, how much it costs to get you over here, and we'll get it done.
That'd be amazing. Thank you so much. This is really, I've truly enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate your time.
No worries, man. Thank you very much.